The commander of the Sudanese armed forces, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has dissolved the civilian government and declared a state of emergency in the country. Burhan also headed the Sovereignty Council, which was established in 2019 in agreement with the Sudanese political opposition to assume the powers of the ousted dictator Omar al-Bashir. The United States, European Union, and United Nations have all called for the immediate release of the detained Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok and other civilian leaders, and for the restoration of civilian government. The African Union has suspended Sudan's membership. Although the military withdrew its support for Bashir in 2019, allowing him to fall, it was never committed to full democratic transition or to handing over all powers to elected civilian leaders. Indeed, one of the likely triggers for Burhan's actions now is that he has been under growing pressure to hand over the ruling Sovereignty Council to a civilian head, as required by the pact he reached with the Sudanese political opposition in 2019. The transfer was due to take place earlier this year, but has been delayed until April 2022. It may now not take place at all, as Burhan has nullified the political agreement upon which the transfer was based. It's also important to keep in mind that the Sudanese officer corps was formed entirely during the rule of former dictator Omar al-Bashir, and that it did not undergo any internal reforms after his overthrow. The military did disband the notorious National Intelligence Service, which was one of Bashir's main instruments for political repression, but it simply moved most of the agency's personnel under its own command rather than to civilian control. Tens of thousands of unarmed civilians are protesting the takeover, but the situation is volatile and the use of force against them cannot be ruled out. The role of external actors is critical. Regional neighbors, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, have always been uncomfortable with the democratic transition and favored the military. Their support may be discreet, but it may also be sufficient for the Sudanese military to believe that it can hold out in the face of international pressure to restore the civilians to power. After all, the Sudanese armed forces can look to neighboring Egypt as an example of a military mounting a coup d'etat and then being rewarded with Western recognition and massive financial assistance. A military-led government will face two principal challenges: keeping a very fragile peace with several significant armed liberation movements in the Darfur region, and keeping a lid on other potential secessionist threats, while restoring an economy devastated by decades of sanctions, war profiteering, and predation by various armed actors. Faced with the threat of new US and Western sanctions, Burhan may try to find allies among the bickering political parties to form a facade civilian government, so as to claim a return to normalcy and deflect international pressure. Exactly how far Burhan will have to bend in order to achieve such a scenario depends on how enduring the civilian protests are inside Sudan and how tough a front is maintained by the United States, European Union, United Nations, and other international bodies such as the African Union, demanding a full restoration of civilian government under Prime Minister Hamdok.